Welcome back to the Abide Project. My name is Pastor Lloyd Hemstreet.
And I am Reverend Tyler Wagonmaker. We are a different angle here.
We're
today,
on the
Lloyd.
lawn at Oak Lawn.
Yes.
Calvary.
But we
Yes.
have a nice view of the steeple.
The steeple's right up there.
Which is beautiful architecture because it points our eyes towards heaven, towards the Lord.
It does.
So
It calls us to focus on entering into worship, which was part of the last message that we heard today as well.
that's right.
So, yeah, we're talking about day 2.
Yes.
At the
What
Abide
is
Project
today? Day two.
Convention. Hold fast. Another great day of speakers, a little more time together in panels today, and discussing a number of things. So I think we just start at the start, and what we kicked off with wonderful time of singing and praising the Lord together, and then Reverend Jason Rice was the one who got us started with the first message today. So
He did. He started us on many ways actually in Psalm 13, which was a crying out to God of things just in the life of his own congregation. And he loved
7 years ago, I believe, the
Yes.
past congregation. But yeah, the challenge that he was in that time just drove him to that psalm. But the challenge that he came to in that psalm was
verse 5.
steadfast has he trusted in our steadfast God.
Yes.
And
that's a hard thing to pray sometimes.
It's a hard thing to pray because he wanted to pray the call to where is the Lord in the
Where
midst
are
of
you,
this
Lord?
challenge and in the midst of this issue. And so with that, he's like, oh, all right, am I trusting in the Lord? Am I being patient and waiting for him to work? And he tied that into our situation in the denomination, our calling, and he gave us a historical lesson as well.
He rooted it in John Calvin. A lot of wonderful quotes actually from the letters of John Calvin. Some of them were hilarious.
Scary quotes.
Scary,
I mean,
hilarious from a historical distance. They're fun to listen to.
Right.
To be John Calvin in the midst of it. Like he wrote on there that every day, 10 times a day, he wished for death. In his pastorate.
Right. I
in
mean, that's
Geneva.
similar to your experience in Beaver Dam, but not my experience in Coopersville, certainly, at all.
Not quite so much.
No.
So no.
No.
That's right.
So, but he highlighted from John Calvin's own words some of the real struggles he had, and the challenge that John Calvin had that he pointed out especially was enacting discipline. That it wasn't something that just happened in Geneva and everything was fine. No, he tried to enact discipline, and they came at him with swords and were going to threaten to cut him up on the Lord's table.
Shotguns, muskets outside of his window while in the middle of the night.
Yep.
Sick their dogs on him.
There was that too, and all of these different things. And he talked about how it was a long process, and so we were challenged that, hey, this isn't something that's going to be over overnight, and God's calling us to trust in Him and His steadfast faithfulness, and to remain, we could say even abide, for a while in the mess that includes reformation. So
because God is faithful, that was a key thing always.
God is faithful.
He always finishes what He begins, and He does it in His timing.
Right. And so who are we to say, well, I'm not going to wait and remain faithful where He's called me to work.
So his is one later on to listen to. For those at home. We did have a panel discussion after Reverend Rice.
We had 4 of the young adult advisors plus 1 deacon that is in that same age range. We had a young adult panel today, and there were a number of encouraging things that they shared and that they challenged all of God's people with at the convention today.
Their experiences at Synod.
Right.
In fact, at the end, it was kind of, what did you learn? What was some of your takeaways?
Right. What did you learn about yourself from this experience of serving at Synod? And one of them talked about how he learned that he doesn't have to be liked.
That's right.
Yeah,
okay
and that's an important thing that all of us need to learn in this day and age. We want to put something forward in such a way that, people will like us. And he recognized, no, it's more important that I stand for the truth, that I'm faithful, than that just I would be liked and by all.
That's right.
So,
And so some great words of wisdom from these young adults.
Right.
And even reflecting about saying, sometimes we look at the issue of sexuality and we say, well, I might not struggle with that, but he said, but what are the blind areas in my life, of sins in my life, and things that I went through, and I didn't see any issue with it. So it's also a continual call to self-reflection,
right,
and to listen to other voices speak into our lives. Say, hey, this is an area where you're really falling away from the Lord.
Right.
So
these are true things that we have to continually remind ourselves of. So lots of good words from the young adults today, and lots of challenges that are very important. So
young adults also mentioned too. Sometimes they think about young adults saying, "Oh, they're these progressives," and so in fact, one young adult representative said that she felt like there was a lot of kind of confirmation bias, that there were many who were maybe on the revisionist side who expected her to be very revisionist, and so when she came out with a very orthodox kind of position, they still afterwards said, well, but we still need to hear from the young adults.
Right.
And she's like, the young adults have been speaking. You just didn't. You don't
want to hear it.
You don't want to hear what we're saying.
So, those were some important things said. Moving on, next we had the steering committee went ahead and gave a long discussion as well as numerous question and answers talking about, hey, where are we headed as a denomination? What needs to come next? What things do we need to focus on, and how are we going to continue to live this out with one another? One of the ways that was specifically discussed, I believe it was the Eric Van Dyken, one of the steering team members, talked about this reality of submission in that. All of us as members in Christian Reformed Church, all of us as office bearers in the Christian Reformed Church, we have made vows. We have given our word that we are going to submit to the church and to its rulings, and we're going to teach in such a way that we're in line with this denomination.
And so he said it's okay to ask that question to those who are maybe recalcitrant and saying, I'm not going to abide by it, to point blank ask them, really, you promised to submit.
Right.
Will you?
Right.
Will you keep your vow that you made before God and his people when maybe you took your ordination, where you where you were installed into office? Will you live into that vow you made?
Yeah.
So there are people who keep like waving at us, by the way, Lloyd. They're trying to distract us hard, but we are laser focused on talking about what we need to talk about. So they're even trying now. All right.
So those were some of the things that we had in that committee. The next panel.
Oh, by the way, one of the other things that I think might be worthwhile is, as one of the words of advice was, for those who maybe are in classes where there's a lot of disagreement on this issue of confessionality, that you bring it up, because Synod said to all the classes, you got to ask each other these questions, but
8C was where we heard
recommendation 8C, which was adopted.
It was adopted by Synod, and it said we need our classes to bring our office bearers into covenant, into line. And so
what happens if they don't?
Right. Well, that's the question. And so the encouragement was given that, hey, we need to engage on these things. And if your classis doesn't approve it, then you just appeal that to Synod.
That's right.
Make it a public appeal and send it to Synod, and let Synod go ahead and continue to work on these matters and sort these things out. So that was an important piece of advice given.
Important point. So
yes.
So
all right, now they're honking at us.
Now they are. It's getting more boisterous out here on the south side of Chicago.
Yeah. Things are kind of deteriorating as we go further along into the
light is decreasing.
Something like that. All right, the last panel discussion. Brief discussion, pretty much just surveying the floor. We talked about, how do we live into these decisions that we have made? How are we going to live this out? What do we need to do in the way of pastoral care? What are you using? What is working? We talked about apologetics. How do we continue to make these cases? What sort of challenges are you seeing that we need to consider and address? And so those were some of the things.
And we even talked about gravaments. In fact, specifically, it was mentioned again, we're going to make sure we give time to talk about gravaments, because it didn't happen at Synod.
We didn't have time at Synod, and so we cut time and we made sure we discussed the gravaments.
Because it's a really important issue. So,
Then the last plenary speaker of the day was Reverend Ken Benjamins. And he went ahead.
What an amazing preacher, by the way.
Yeah,
I could sit under his preaching. For like years of my life.
Yep. And he called us to, hey, how do we continue to build up the church? And one of the ways that he encouraged us to do that is going to be in worship. So we need to continue to encourage one another. In the Abide Project, we need to continue to encourage one another. You know, as talked about earlier in the panel discussion, what's the secret of the Abide Project? Is it the millions of dollars that fund us?
From the T-shirts that have been sold, of course.
Yes. Dollars on the T-shirt. No, it's not that. It's not political wranglings. It's the friendships that we've made. It's the ability we've had to network and talk together and to trust one another and encourage each other.
Yes.
And so he said we need to do that all the more. Second thing he said, we need to encourage our families, especially around this area of sexuality. We need to be talking about these things as our family.
He brought out how the 10 Commandments, he said, you know, of the 10 Commandments, one of the 10, 1/10 of them directly talks about sex.
Right.
And really, because the 10th commandment, really 20% of the 10 Commandments deal with matters of sexuality.
And so that shouldn't be something that's never stayed from our pulpits. That shouldn't be something that's never discussed around our kitchen tables.
Right.
If we're going to disciple our children and raise them up in the Lord, that's going to be part of the discussion. So that was a couple of the points.
And then also the CRC was the third.
Right.
The
third one
we need to encourage to love, love and good deeds.
Yep. By gathering together. So
by gathering together.
So anyway,
and praying for one another, praying for Zach King, our General Secretary, praying for our church visitors. Some of them will be doing some very difficult work, some difficult conversations with some congregations. So prayer, the Lord works through that. But yeah,
so those were some of the things that we talked about today. It was a blessing to be together. We're sad for everybody that wasn't here. And we don't know when the next video will come of us again necessarily. But I do have this here in my hand, Tyler. Do you know what's on this?
It looks like a very complicated device, which is beyond my understanding, actually.
I'm sure you wouldn't be able to use it. But anyway, it is on here we have all the videos of it, of our time together. And so the plan, Lord willing, as long as they make it back safely to Coopersville and get online and into Canada, then we will be posting them over the next number of weeks. Look for those to be released. Lord willing, if everything works, we're going to be releasing many of these speeches and our gatherings from
And if someone wants to hear live preaching again and singing and gathering, not just on a video, there was the talk today about there being another one of these next year.
Next year.
But where, perhaps?
Watch for it. Put it in your calendar as soon as you see it. And the thought is we're going to be moving not back to Grand Rapids. We're going to move a little further west. We're talking maybe Minnesota, quite possibly Iowa. So keep that in your minds. Tuck it away. Look for the announcements. And there's going to be a convention team pulling it together. No doubt. It was a great blessing these last 2 days.
It was wonderful.
A lot of encouragement. And there's a lot of things to be encouraged about as God is working in our denomination. And so we've heard the call. Let's continue to hold fast, and let's continue to seek to be faithful to His honor and glory. All right, signing off from Chicagoland. We'll see you next time.